To be or not to be? That is the question when it comes to Donald Trump's tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And yet again, we are into not to be category right now.
I am in a world spin. I am getting whiplash. It's insane to me that he was so adamant. March 2nd, whatever date.
Yes.
You will be there is nothing you could do to get around it. The
But
tariffs are then on for 2 days.
Yes.
And then he's like, actually, I don't really care.
Yeah. So basically the 25% tariffs overall on Mexico and Canada went into effect for about 48 to 72 hours, somewhere between there. And then today, March 6th, 2 days after they went into effect, Trump said, no, actually the tariffs are not going to be applied to any goods that fall under the kind of rules, the standards of USMCA, which is the trade agreement that the U.S., Mexico, and Canada signed, 2019?
Under Donald Trump.
Under Donald Trump in his first term. Which that essentially means the tariffs are off. Before that, he also exempted automakers from tariffs because they're so integrated with both the Canadian and Mexican supply chains.
Yeah, there was going to be like cars that were $80,000 going to be $100,000.
Yeah.
Other sedans were going to go up by $10,000. So he ran into reality.
Yes.
Right? That's what happened. Donald
Yes.
Trump got his head smashed with reality.
Yes. Now, to be clear, these tariffs have only been delayed a month.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what happened last time in February. This is now what happened again in March, and we're going to be back at this rigmarole in April. On April 2nd.
This reminds me of when the Republicans were threatening to shut the government down under Biden. And like every month and a half, we were making a video about the Republican shutdown, whatever. And now here we are, we're doing the same thing, but it's Donald Trump's decision of whether or not to crash the economy every month.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to me, it's hard we have actually, before this video, been sitting in Anthony's living room, like trying really hard. Genuinely to figure out what is really going on.
What
here
is
with the
the
tariffs.
game plan? What are they doing? What is their goal?
And so we need to lay out at least like what we think it could be, what some people are trying to give them credit for. So I think the most obvious part of this is, or there are two obvious parts. One, tariffs as a source of revenue for the government, which currently has massive fiscal deficits and has a ton of debt burden to pay off. And two, the idea that tariffs can help reshore some American manufacturing that has been lost over the course of globalization that has really been happening since the 70s.
Or I want to give three.
Sure.
And the third one is just general negotiating tactics for general geopolitical power.
Yes.
Right?
And so negotiation is probably the one that deserves some credibility.
Yes. And I also want to say that a lot of these three pillars that tariffs, the benefits that they can produce are mutually exclusive. They can't be a negotiating tactic and a way to raise revenue.
It's a three-body problem. Yes.
You have to pick one, because if it's a negotiating tactic, then you can't rely on them for revenue for any type of legislation, because you can't pay for anything with them.
Yes.
Because they're not reliable income.
Yes. And if they're a tool to incentivize reshoring of manufacturing, they're not going to be a tool to collect a lot of revenue, because instead the stuff is just going to be made here and you're not going to get the taxes off of it.
And it's not going to end if it's an idea to reshore manufacturing. It's not a negotiating tactic, because the negotiating tactic is eventually to get rid of them when you gain something, and that doesn't help industrial growth at all.
Exactly. So so why is it not good for revenue? Well, first of all, the tariff didn't actually go on. They got taken off. So clearly it's not doing the revenue thing. Also, if we look at the total imports that the United States buys from all of the world, if you tariffed it at 100% and those import flows stayed the same, that would not cover on its own the entirety of the government's budget. Okay, so what we're talking about with only 25% tariffs on only Canada and Mexico, and again, thinking that this won't change behavior to avoid the tariffs, they are not a very serious revenue source.
No.
Two, as far as reshoring American manufacturing, this is where I would love to be able to give some credit. But if you really wanted to reshore American manufacturing, you would realize that building a factory, deciding to make the investment, building the factory in America, where it is naturally more expensive to build things because of land costs and labor costs and energy costs sometimes, it takes years. It takes at least more than a year, right? So the best way to make sure that doesn't happen is to threaten to put the tariffs on every month and then take them off every month. Because you are telling every business person, you can't have any idea of whether these tariffs are actually going to happen.
These companies need to build out supply chains, okay? And if you're going to build out supply chains, you have to know your entire cost. And you can't do that if you have a president who is going to willy-nilly throw the word tariff around. No company's going to be interested in investing. They're just going to wait.
Yes, and he's throwing it around willy-nilly, seeming like he doesn't actually care if they go on or not.
Yes.
Like the way that these 25% tariffs just were on for 2 days and then he took them off. Right. And again, that's where it seems like the last leg of this is that they could be a negotiating tactic. But as far as we know, nothing has been reported on concessions that he got from Canada or Mexico this time around.
No, he got no concessions this time. Well, he didn't get any. He barely got concessions last time, but he got literally nothing. Not even a PR move this time.
Exactly. The only thing last time is there was at least some mouth service paid from Mexico to be like, we're going to try to wean ourselves off of Chinese imports, and that's where you start to see, okay, there could be some strategy here with, if you want to kind of isolate the Western Hemisphere and a new Monroe Doctrine to be kind of under the sphere of influence of the U.S., you are going to apply pressure to make sure that Canada and Mexico, specifically the biggest countries, your biggest trading partners in the hemisphere, are not also paying China for a lot of their inputs.
But then my problem with that, which I get, like I get that, like creating a new Monroe Doctrine, isolating the Western Hemisphere, all of that makes sense to me. But I think the worst way to go about trying to accomplish something like that is to bend the partners over and smack them with a paddle.
Yeah.
Because they're going to resent you.
Yes.
And I think that's what's happening now in Mexico and Canada. The people in those countries are resenting us.
Totally.
The leaders don't want to trust us.
Yeah.
And so we're doing the opposite of creating a unified Western Hemisphere.
And I think it doesn't even really check out from the very beginning, because under Joe Biden, we were building a more unified global order that all wanted to stand up to China.
Yeah.
And you can argue that order wasn't doing good enough and wasn't acting fast enough. But what this order is now doing is I don't think that countries in Europe or other potential partners in Central America or South America are looking at the U.S. as like, oh, we obviously want to go with the U.S. versus China. We're going to get much better treatment. We're going to get a much better deal out of the U.S.
Yeah.
It's at least equivalent, if not the U.S. is now looking worse because of how much of an asshole Donald Trump is being to these countries.
And then the big word, stability. You don't want to partner with somebody who's a little schizophrenic, okay, who might feel one way one day and then feel a different way the next day.
Yes.
You don't want to be around them. You want to break up with that person as soon as possible,
Yes.
right? You don't want to wake up to somebody with their hair lit on fire. And that's what Canada woke up to when Donald Trump became president. And so every other country is like, okay, I don't want to date that person anymore because they're fucking crazy.
Yeah, it's not, I don't want to roll the dice every day to see like, oh, is this going to be okay today or am I going to get stabbed?
And so now we've seen the effects of this lack of stability more than anything. We got estimates for the GDP growth of Q1 of 2025 out from the Atlanta Fed. Now, these estimates are not finalized. It's called like a GDP Now program. It's a moving system, takes data in every week. But they have seen consumer spending decrease by or stay flat over the course of the quarters.
Yes.
So there is no increase in consumer spending, which is our biggest section of growth in the entire country.
Yes.
And a decrease of 0.2% in investment, private business investment, quarter over quarter. So companies are investing less this quarter than what they were last quarter.
Honestly, when I think about this, you basically have an attack on every component of GDP.
Yeah.
Exports minus imports is one of the components. While imports have spiked in an attempt to front-run tariffs, so that's dragging down GDP. Private investment, down because of uncertainty. Consumer spending, down because of uncertainty that about whether tariffs are going to tank the economy, whether they're going to raise prices so that they feel like they're going to need to hoard a little bit more of their money now so they have more of it to spend later. Government spending, fourth one, right?
Down.
Where the PR is like, we are destroying government spending. And honestly, what they're actually doing is much more questionable and murky as far as how much government spending they're taking off the table, because all of these headlines about government workers getting fired, if you look into the data and into the budget, like what is being paid to these government workers is a very small percentage of the government budget.
And then they get paid, and then the court says you have to rehire them, so then they get rehired. We just got like 6,000 USDA workers that just got rehired today.
Yep.
Right? So like all this talk of government spending being reduced, it's not really that true.
Yeah.
But the feeling is true, and then that feeling discourages consumption. People get worried, and then the economy falls flat because of the lack of stability.
And so then we have to shift to trying to analyze, like, okay, this seems so clear that Trump is inducing a slowdown, like engineering a recession almost.
Yeah.
So why could that be the case? And so then you start to think, okay, well, in a recession, one thing that happens is that treasury yields generally go down because people pile into treasury bonds as a safe haven for their money.
If the stock market's losing 2%, whatever, year over year, but you can get 3% in a treasury bond, you're going to take that 3% every day.
Yes.
Which then encourages lesser returns in the stock market as less people invest their money there. So it's a terrible system. It's a terrible cycle there. But that's what's happening now. We saw treasury bonds go down for a little while. They spiked back up today.
Yes, they're starting to go back up, but we can, again, trying to figure out how there could be rhyme and reason because we're crossing out so many of the ways that this could actually make sense, right? Treasury yields being lower is actually important for the government because our deficits are so enormous, and because this year a debt refinancing cycle is coming up for the U.S. federal government, where there's like $7 to $8 trillion of our federal debt that needs to be refinanced. The issue with this, the way that we cross this one off the list as being a good reason, is for this to be significant, you basically need to get the effective yields that you're paying on this refinanced debt down to zero.
Yeah.
And the reason so what that would take is a crisis level collapse that requires a lot of quantitative easing by the Federal Reserve, which would mean it's just buying up treasuries by printing money in an effort to likely prop up the banking system is the only way I could imagine it going.
I agree.
But one, you're going to cause a ton of pain for people. Two, if you do anything besides get to the point of a crisis, like this kind of system or this slowdown that we've been having, this gradual letting air out of the economy, treasury yields aren't going to collapse because people are going to buy treasuries, but they're also going to they're going to keep an eye on the fiscal situation of the government. And all of this is happening while the government is on the brink of a shutdown again, as it struggles to raise the debt ceiling, as Trump and other Republicans throw out ideas for changing the math that they do with their new spending bill in Congress to allow
we made a whole video about that. It's a
$7
bunch of BS.
trillion in additional government debt to accrue over the next 10 years. And so you're just going to have a floor on what your yields are. And this is the important thing. If the yields get to 3.5, that's not going to be enough.
No. To make a difference at all.
Yes.
It's not, and it's not worth the pain that's going to be induced.
Yes, exactly.
It's not worth the pain. Your tax receipts will go down because of the slowdown in economic growth, the lack of consumption, the lack of asset prices going up.
Yes.
You're just going to get screwed.
And it's going to, it's more than that because it's going to be counter-effective, counterintuitive, where the tax receipts that we're taking in as a government are actually going to go down because the economy is doing worse. And so when consumption and businesses are doing worse, there's going to be less income tax, less capital gains tax. And so it doesn't even work in the first place.
No.
There is no space for that to work. And so you get at this point where we were sitting on the couch earlier and we're like, what is the actual idea here?
I want to give one more, right? We saw there's a bunch of news on the left online talking about is this an idea from the oligarchs to consolidate more and more ownership of things? If asset prices and there's a collapse in the asset market, will these richer people be able to buy up all the assets on the cheap in a fire sale? You put it a good point. Not really, because all their money is tied up in these assets.
Yes.
So if the assets collapse and they're not ahead of the curve on it, some guys are already ahead of the curve. Warren Buffett's like all cash now, right?
Yep.
So Warren Buffett could come out owning everything.
Yes. And then die.
Yeah, and then die. And so I have no idea what he's doing. And so it's frustrating
Yeah.
because Bessent, he goes out, this Treasury Secretary goes out and he writes these op-eds and he gives these interviews, but he's saying mutually exclusive things. He's saying things that can't coexist in the same sentence.
Yes, and I'm fine with that if I can view it as just PR,
Yes.
and then I can read between the lines. And I'm like, okay, no, this is what's actually going to happen. But I can't
no
get
lines.
there. There's nothing at the core of this, and I am inclined to like not consider these people who have gotten to the highest seats of power in the American government as purely idiotic. I think Trump might not know everything, but I think some of these people like Bessent on his team.
Bessent's a smart guy.
Yes.
Bessent knows. Bessent knows something, and he's not saying it, and he doesn't, or he's like, this is something that I think could very well be the possibility.
Okay.
He's sitting there in the room, and he's trying just to convince Trump to shut the fuck up, and he's like begging him to just like stop doing the whole
Stop trying the tariffs.
Yeah, just stop it, please. And I imagine that's probably what he's doing.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Okay.
And I think Lutnick is also doing the same thing.
Okay.
Because Lutnick was going out and basically front running the idea that Trump was going to take the tariffs off. And so Lutnick goes on TV and he's like, the tariffs aren't going to stay on the automakers. They might not even stay on everything else. And then Trump is going on TV and he's saying, we're going to leave these tariffs on until we annex all of Canada. And then so like, there's a whole conflict going on, and I don't understand his strategy, and it's pissing me off.